In this video, we'll start out with simple01.fla, which is located in your project files folder. This is the file we ended with in the last video. And what we want to do is we want to make this website work. So far, we've laid out all of our web pages. And obviously, if we're making our own website, we're going to make this a little bit more complicated than just home and then a bunch of random text. What we're going to do is we're going to put all of our content for our home page here. So we might have some images here. We might have some scrolling text, which we'll talk about later. Things like that. But for now, we've just put some dummy content in here so we can explain how a simple website works. So we have our home page, and then on frame 10, we basically have a new web page. We have the About Us page. On the About Us page, we might have some different content describing our company, things like that. But all of this content is located in a new keyframe here on frame 10. We put our contact page on frame 20 and our products page on frame 30. So ideally, for each of these pages, we would have different content. For now, we just want to illustrate how we can get this to work. Now, so far, we've put a stop action in frame 1 of our actions layer. Let's go ahead and lock all of our layers now. So we put that stop action there on frame 1 so that it doesn't automatically start playing through all of these frames. Because we don't want this to act as an animation right now. We just want it to act as a website. We want each of these frames to be different pages in a website. So we'll never actually play through frame 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. What we're going to do is we're going to add some code to our buttons so that when we click on them, it will jump straight to the appropriate frame. Okay? So we're going to do all of this in frame 1. I'm going to go ahead, in order to make our timeline look pretty, I'm going to go out to frame 40 for our actions layer and hit F5 just to insert some frames there to extend those frames out to the end so that we have a nice flush right side there. That's just something anal that I like to do. Okay, so now we're going to click on frame 1. Everything else we're going to do for this website is going to be done in our action script. So we'll click on frame 1, hit F9 to open up our actions. We have our stop action there, but now what we want to do is hit enter a couple of times to skip a line, and we want to create some code for our buttons. Now, if you've used ActionScript 2 in the past, then you're going to have to learn a new way of adding interactivity to your buttons. In ActionScript 2, we could point to the button name and create an onRelease event for it. In ActionScript 3, we're basically doing the same type of thing, except we need to explicitly add an event listener to our buttons. And then once we add that event listener is going to call on a function that we're going to create. And inside that function, we're going to type the code that we want to occur whenever we click on our buttons. Now, before we can actually add code for our buttons here, we need to give our buttons instance names, because there's no way to tell which button we're talking about if we start typing in some code here. So let's close our actions for a second, and let's unlock the buttons layer, and we're going to click on each of our buttons and give them an instance name. Now, the instance name is found in the Properties panel. With our button selected, our home button, we want to give this an instance name, so we're going to click in the instance name text field and give this an instance name of home_btn. Now, this _btn at the end doesn't have to be there. If you wanted, you could just call this home. But if you put that _btn there at the end, then it will give us some very helpful code hints when we actually start typing in our ActionScript code. So now we're going to click on our About Us button, and we're going to give this an instance name of About_btn. Click on the Contact button. We'll give this an instance name of Contact_btn. We'll go to the Products button and give this an instance name of Products_btn and hit enter. Okay, so we've given each of these instance names. Now we can actually add code and point to these buttons. Now, again, if you're familiar with older versions of Flash, if you're familiar with using ActionScript 2, you used to be able to click on a button and then hit F9 in order to add actions to the button itself. We can't do that anymore. As you can see, current selection cannot have actions applied to it. Now we can only add actions to a frame. For instance, in this first keyframe of our actions layer, we're going to add actions to that keyframe. So you can only add actions to a keyframe. You can also create a separate ActionScript file, but we're not really going to worry about that. We're just going to create our actions on our actions layer in this first keyframe here. So let's click on that first keyframe and hit F9 to open up our ActionScript. We have our stop action, and now we want to add event listeners to each of our buttons. Now we've called our home button home_btn. That's the instance name that we gave to it. And now we want to add an event listener to this home button. And since we gave this home button an instance name that ends with _btn, when we hit the dot key or the period, we get this little pop-up code hint here. And we can look at all the things that we can do with a button. Well, what we want to do with our home button, notice if we click outside of it, then we get rid of it. So we can actually, if that happens, we can hit backspace to get rid of that period and then hit the period again. And what we want to do is we want to add an event listener. And we can see that right here, add event listener. Or if we didn't click there and we just start typing it in, at some point that add event listener will be highlighted. When it's highlighted, we can either double click on it or hit enter to finish filling that out. Now we need something in between the parentheses. We need the type of event listener here, or the type of event that we're listening for, and then we're going to need to type in the name of the function that we want to call whenever we click on our button, or whenever this event listener hears that we've clicked on our button. So the type of event we're listening for is a click event, whenever the user clicks on this particular button. And so this is located within the mouse event class. So we have mouse with a capital M, event with a capital E, dot, and then click with all capital letters. Now, if you're familiar with ActionScript 2, this is the exact same thing as the onRelease event for ActionScript 2. The click event here is not triggered until you press your mouse button down on this particular button and then release it. So the click event, again, is the same as the onRelease event in ActionScript 2. If you're not familiar with ActionScript 2, then you don't even have to worry about it. So we have mouse event.click, and then we need a comma here, and then we'll put a space, and then we need the name of the function that we want to run whenever the user triggers this event. Now, there is no function here. We haven't created this function. So we're going to create the function, and we're going to give it a name. Let's just call it onHomeClick. Now, you can call that function whatever you want to, as long as it's not a reserved word. And you can tell very easily that it's a reserved word if it turns blue when you type it in, such as mouse event or click. But we're going to call it onHomeClick. So let's skip a couple lines. We'll create a function here by typing in the word function, space, and then we give the name of the function, onHomeClick. Make sure that you capitalize it and spell it the exact same way that you did up here. So function onHomeClick, and then inside the parentheses for this function, we need to reference an event variable. So we can call it event if we want to, or we can just call it something easy like E, and then we need to strict type it. We need to tell Flash what type of variable this is that we're putting inside the parentheses. Well, we're going to type colon, and it's a mouse event. Mouse event. So we're basically pointing to this mouse event right here, this mouse event.click. So we'll put that inside the parentheses for this function. If we don't put this event variable inside the parentheses, then we're going to get an error when we try to test our file. And then after the closing parenthesis, I'm going to put colon void, just to tell Flash that this function is not going to return any values. We'll go to the next line, put our opening curly bracket for this function, skip a couple lines, and put our closing curly bracket. I like to put the opening and closing curly bracket before I do anything else. That way we don't forget to close it off when we're done. Okay, so inside this function, we're going to type the code that we want to occur whenever we click on the home button. Okay? Well, when we click on the home button, we simply want it to take us to the home page. So we want it to take us to frame 1. And the way we do that is we simply say, go to, and with a capital A, stop with a capital S, and then inside parentheses, we can say frame 1. However, there's a better way to do this. Instead of pointing to the number 1, let's use these labels that we gave to our frames. So instead of pointing to frame 1, we simply want to point to the home page. So let's delete 1 there. Let's highlight that, delete it. And then inside quotation marks, I'll just type home, because that's the name of the frame that we want it to take us to. So we're going to go to the home page. Now, if we test our movie now, we won't really be able to tell what's going on because we're already on the home page. So let's create another piece of code for the About Us button. So right after this first home button event listener, We'll go to the end of that line and hit enter, and we'll do the same thing for the about button. So about_btn.add event listener. It's highlighted, so we can just hit enter to fill it out. This is going to be a click event as well, so mouse event.click with all capital letters, comma, space, and then we'll call this on about click. Close your parentheses, semicolon to end your statement. So down here below the on home click function, we'll create a similar function called on about click, and we need to point to that same event variable, so e::mouse event, close your parentheses, colon void. We'll put our opening and closing curly brackets, and then when we click on the about button, we want to go to and stop the frame labeled about. So let's test that and see if that works. Control Enter to test your movie. We're on the home page by default, but if we click on the About Us page, it should take us to frame 10 where our About Us content is. So we click on About Us, and sure enough, that worked. Now we already have our code for our home button as well, so we can click on Home, and that takes us back to the home page. And that's basically how you create a simple website using Flash. Now there are numerous ways to create a website, so we'll talk about some more of that a little bit later, but this is one way of doing it. So let's create the same code for our content or our contact and products buttons. So let's just copy these two lines of code here where we created our event listeners for our other two buttons. We'll hit Control C to copy that, and then after those two lines of code, we'll hit Control V to paste it, and this time we'll be pointing to contact_btn and products_btn. These are the other two buttons that we have in our menu bar. And instead of taking us to on home click, our contact button is going to take us to on contact click, and our products button is going to take us to on products click. So we can also copy and paste this function a couple times. So we'll copy that, skip a couple lines, paste it, skip a couple lines, paste it again. And for this function, we'll call this one on contact click. And when we click on the contact button, we want it to take us to the frame labeled contact. So we'll go to and stop contact. And then for our final function, on products click, we want it to take us to the frame labeled products. Now this seems a whole lot more complicated than it used to be using ActionScript 2. With ActionScript 2 we could do this using less code, but this setup is not necessarily a bad thing. ActionScript 3 is a lot more consistent than ActionScript 2 was. And if you learn how to do a few things in ActionScript 3, then it's going to be very easy to learn how to do more things. So you might be complaining at first that all of this is a lot more complicated than it used to be. But once you really get in and start learning ActionScript 3, you'll discover that things like this really aren't too difficult. So let's close this. We'll test our file, make sure that all of our buttons work. We're already on the home page. We'll click on About Us. It takes us to the About Us page. We click on Contact. We go to Contact, Products, go back to Home. Very good. So now we can click on each of our buttons in any order that we'd like to, and we see that each of these buttons works just fine. So that's how you create a simple website using Flash CS3 and ActionScript 3. So let's save our file. We'll save this as simple02.fla. So we'll save that, and we'll move on with the next video.